Welcome on our YouTube channel Klimawissen Online. Today we have again an English lecture. And our speaker today is Dr. Anna Dimitrova. The focus of Anna's research is on the effects of climate change on populations in low and middle income countries. She is particularly interested in health outcomes, environmental migration, and underlying social inequalities. Anna gained her PhD from the Vienna University of Economics and Business in 2020. And her doctoral thesis, in her doctoral thesis, she studied the impacts of climate change on child health in India and Ethiopia. The title of her lecture today is Climate Change and Child Health. So, and now I say hello to you, Anna. Thank you that you can join us today in this climate talk. And I would say the stage is yours for the next 30 minutes. Hello, Anna.
Hi, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to present some of my work and the more general work in this area. I would like to share my presentation with you. Can you, yeah.
Yeah, we can see it now.
See it? Okay, great. Okay, well, as you may know, because of increased industrial activity, we have increased the greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, and especially since the 1950s and the 1960s. And this is mostly from the burning of coal, oil, and gas. And this has changed the climate on our planet. Most of all, it has led to an increase in global surface temperatures. The temperatures have been increasing every year since we started recording. And you can see that last year, 2020, was the second warmest year. And it was in some places, for example, in Europe and Asia, it was even the warmest year on record. And we're seeing temperatures that we have never experienced before. And while rise in temperatures is what we probably relate mostly to climate change, it's not the only impact. So the rise in temperatures are ultimately changing our whole climate system. It's leading to an increase in extreme events like droughts and floods, hurricanes, and wildfires. All of these we have observed in the past years. We have seen especially an increase in the number of floods, droughts, storms, and you have probably seen in the news reports about certain events in different parts of the world. Well, this is impacting human health in many different ways. Air pollution, for example, it directly impacts our health because the fine particulate matters in the air can get into our cardiovascular system, it can get into our respiratory system, and it can cause all kinds of diseases. But the extreme weather events caused by air pollution, they can also impact our health in many different ways. And I will mention just some of this in the next minutes. Well, in this lecture, I want to talk about child health. And I want to talk about young children, especially children under the age of 5, because they're very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. In this figure, I wanted to show you the causes of child death in the world today. And as you can see, most of these, more than half of child deaths in the world today are caused by infectious diseases. A lot of child deaths are caused by nutritional disorders or premature birth or birth complications. And I want to point that these statistics are mostly from poor countries. So because most child deaths nowadays happen in poor countries, and in these places, things like infectious diseases and malnutrition are a serious problem for child health. And of course, if we look at a situation in a place like Austria or Western Europe, this will be very different. But I want to focus this lecture on poor countries where climate change is causing the most impacts on children's health. Well, I want to start by talking a little bit about child malnutrition. Child malnutrition is caused by the low intake of food by children. So if they're not eating enough, or if they're not eating the right kind of food, if they're not eating nutritious food. There are different ways we can measure if children are malnourished, or we can observe if they're malnourished. For example, we can measure children's height, and children that have been malnourished over long periods of time tend to be shorter than they should be. They just couldn't grow fast enough. And this is a condition that is called stunting. Stunting is when children are short compared to their peers for the same age. We can also observe that malnourished children they don't have enough weight, so they can be too skinny. So this condition is called wasting, when children have very low weight. And both stunting and wasting can be serious conditions. They can lead they can slow children's development, they can affect their cognitive development as well, and they can have impact for the rest of their lives. They can lead to chronic diseases for the rest of their lives. So these are very serious problems. Well, here I wanted to show you in 1990 the share of children in every country that would be considered stunted. That means that they were too short for their age. And you can see in 1990, like in some parts of Africa and Asia, almost all children were malnourished. Something like 70–80% of children will be malnourished. Well, this is how the picture looks like nowadays. And you can see that the situation has improved, but it is still quite high. Something like half of children in parts of Africa are still stunted. Well, how does this relate to climate change? Well, we have to consider that in places like many countries in Africa, a lot of people work in agriculture. Here I have shown in this figure how the share of people working in agriculture in a number of African countries. And you can see that in Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Malawi, more than 60% of people are employed in agriculture. Not only that, but they are subsistence farmers. This means that they produce their own food. Just for comparison, I also included here the numbers for Germany and the United States. And you can see that in developed countries, something like less than 1% of the population works in agriculture. And the reason for that is because we have access to advanced technologies, and we can produce a lot of food with very little labor. But this is not the case in places like in Africa, where people don't have access to these technologies. And in fact, they mostly rely on rainfall for growing their crops. And if rainfall is delayed or if it's not sufficient, then this can impact their food production, this can impact their main sources of income, and this can push people into poverty. And you can see just how high the number or the share of people is that depend on rain-fed agriculture for their subsistence. Well, just to give you one example, in 2015, Ethiopia was affected by one of the worst droughts in decades. Something like 10 million people in the country were at risk of hunger, and the government had to provide emergency assistance to millions of people. Well, this also gave rise or has coincided with some conflict in the country. And when you have something like a drought and a conflict, this is a very, very dangerous situation, because a conflict can reduce access to food to people, and it can lead to starvation. Well, not only people lost their food and income, but also a lot of people didn't have access to clean water. And this means that they started consuming water from unsafe sources, for example, surface water. And this has led to the outbreaks of all kinds of diseases. Just to give you an idea, this is the numbers of people that don't have access to clean water. You can see that this is very high still in parts of Africa and South Asia. And during droughts, these numbers increase even more. Well, too little rain is bad, because it can lead to droughts, increasing consumption of unsafe water and infectious diseases. But too much water can also be a problem. And like I mentioned earlier, climate change has also been linked to the increase in the number of floods happening throughout the world. And here I would like to give you two examples. In 2018, if you remember, maybe hearing in the news, southern India was affected by one of the worst floods in nearly 100 years. And last year, Bangladesh was affected by severe floods as well. And a third of the country was declared underwater after months of rain. A lot of people had to be evacuated, but also we have seen an increase in outbreaks of infectious diseases, and this is because of water and food contamination. And we have seen outbreaks of cholera and other diseases which are particularly dangerous for young children, because their immune systems are weaker, and they cannot, they're not as good as fighting against these diseases. One example is the rotavirus. This is a virus that is one of the main killers of young children in poor countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. And we have effective ways of protecting ourselves against infectious diseases. And as you probably know, vaccines is one of these ways, and we're all waiting to be vaccinated, for example, against the coronavirus, so we will be protected. But in poor countries, a lot of people still don't have access to some of the basic vaccines that here we receive early on as babies, and we don't have to worry about. But in places like in sub-Saharan Africa, thousands of lives can be saved just by vaccinating people. Well, diseases can travel by water, but they can also travel by insects. And mosquitoes are one insect that are specifically important. They can carry all kinds of diseases like malaria, dengue fever, Zika, West Nile fever. And mosquitoes, they like warm climate. And since the global temperature is getting higher, we are observing that mosquitoes are starting to spread to places where they never were before, like even parts of Europe. And this trend is likely to continue as the climate is getting warmer and warmer. And this is very worrying for the future. You can see that, in fact, young children are among the main victims of diseases like malaria. Children under the age of 5, they represent more than half of all deaths caused by malaria. And this is because children's immune systems are weaker and they can't fight against this virus. There are effective ways of protecting ourselves against insect diseases carried by insects like malaria. And this is one of the good examples is bed nets. Since mosquitoes and other insects are mostly active during the night, if children sleep under bed nets that are treated with special chemicals that kill the mosquitoes, then their health can be protected. And the distribution of bed nets has saved millions of lives, but there are still places where children don't have access to bed nets. There are still places where more lives can be saved if we simply distribute more bed nets. Well, we talked about droughts and we talked about floods. Another extreme climate event related to global warming are heat waves. And as you saw already, we're observing temperatures that are extreme and that are dangerous for the human body and that we have never seen before. And these temperatures are increasing every year. Heat waves are particularly dangerous for pregnant women and for young children. Pregnant women that have been exposed to heat waves are more likely to give birth prematurely before 9 months, and this increases the risk for babies, and it's a very dangerous situation. But young newborns are also very vulnerable to heat waves because they're not as good at regulating their body temperature. They're very vulnerable on the outside conditions, and this means that heat waves can be very dangerous for them. And finally, I just wanted to mention briefly also the main culprit, the main reason behind all of these extreme climate events and the change in the global climate system, and this is air pollution. And air pollution can impact our health directly as well, because of the fine particulate matters can get into our lungs, into our bloodstreams. It can cause cancer, asthma, and only recently we have started to understand better the impact of air pollution on children's health. More and more studies are showing that air pollution can impact children's growth and development. It can impact their cognitive development. It can have all kinds of serious risks. And this is because children's bodies are still not fully developed. Their lungs are not fully developed, so they are very vulnerable to exposure to such fine particulate matters. Air pollution is bad. We can experience air pollution outside, which is caused by traffic, industrial activities. But in some poor places, people also can experience indoor air pollution. And this is because poor people still, in some places, still cook with fire. They cook with coal and wood, and this can cause their living environment to be polluted. And since women and young children are more likely to be in the house during the day and while cooking, this can severely impact their health as well. So we need to keep in mind that outdoor and indoor air pollution can both be serious for children's health. And moreover, according to the World Health Organization, more than 90% of people on the planet nowadays live in places that are considered too polluted for their health. So they're living in places that are exceeding the healthy limits of, or the limits of air pollution, and they're impacting our health. And this is just an incredible number, and it just says how urgently we need to take actions against that. Well, we know that air pollution is causing all kinds of problems, and in this distorted map, I wanted to show you who is responsible for it. And as you can see, so the map is distorted in a way which shows the contribution of each country to carbon dioxide. And as you can see, the places that are most affected by climate change, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, well, these are countries that have contributed the least to climate change. And this is something that we should also keep in mind. And I wanted to finish by saying that poor people within the poor countries are the most adversely affected by climate change. This is people that don't have access to clean water, people that use solid fuels for cooking, people that rely on agriculture for their income and food, pregnant women exposed to heat waves that don't have access to air conditioning. And it is important to consider such inequalities when we want to think about the ways to deal with the impacts of climate change and the ways to protect children. And so I just want to summarize some of the things that we mentioned. Climate change can impact children's health in many different ways, through the spread of diseases, by affecting agriculture, food, access to food, air pollution, heat waves, and children are especially vulnerable because they're still growing, they're still developing, and they're very susceptible to diseases and to malnutrition caused by climate change. And I just wanted to end by showing and mentioning to you the Sustainable Development Goals. You probably have heard about this already. So these are 17 goals that are guiding us and guiding governments and international organizations in the next years for improving human life in many different aspects. And child health in climate change are both reflected into these goals. We have goals for reducing hunger, for addressing access to clean water and sanitation, for taking action on climate. So this is a good starting point. And this is something that we need to continue working on. And thank you very much for listening. And I'm looking forward to your questions and to the discussion.
Thank you, Anna. So for your lecture, before we come to the question and answer session, I would like to say goodbye to our visitors on our YouTube channel. Perhaps you can also watch one of our other videos. Bye-bye.